Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and welcome to our tertulia called Antisemitism Unmasked, Reflections on Holocaust Remembrance Day, brought to you by the Hispanic Heritage Foundation and American Jewish Committee. I want to remind everyone as you join us to please set your comments in the chat box to all and not just to panelists. It's a default to panelists, and if you change it now, you won't have to later, because we want to make sure to hear your comments, your remarks, and also feel your energy as we undertake this important conversation. At HHF, we want to address racism, bias, bigotry, and hatred in any form, and anti-Semitism has been called one of the world's oldest hatreds. In the last decade, we have witnessed how it has spiked around the world and in the United States, including in Charlottesville, Virginia, where, as is often the case, we were all lumped together as targets of white supremacists. Blacks, Latinx, LGBTQ, Asians, immigrants, Muslims, Jews, we are all thought of as the other when we're actually the majority. And La Lucha is real, and La Lucha needs to be inclusive. So during this tertulia, we will try to unmask the origins and current expressions of this prejudice, assess the perceptions in our own Latinx communities, which is really important that we do that, and discuss how we can confront hate crime stereotypes and targeting together. There is no one better to talk through these issues than mi hermana, mi profesora, Dina Siegel. Dina is a proud native of Mexico City and is the director of the AJC's Arthur and Rochelle Belfer Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs. Dina previously served as the United Nations and Latin American Affairs Director for B'nai B'rith International. Before immigrating to the United States in 1996, she was the Political Affairs Director for the Mexican Jewish community. In her AJC role, she has traveled widely and developed a network of diplomatic and political contacts. She organized the first Latino Jewish Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. in 2001, and the National Conversation on the State of Latino Jewish Relations in 2013. So it has been long work. In 2011, she was instrumental in finding the Congressional Latino Jewish Caucus. Dina also received numerous awards from her intergroup and civil rights work all over the world, including from King Felipe VI of Spain, who awarded her the Order of the Civil Merit. She also received the prestigious Otley Award from the Mexican government. Dina graduated magna cum laude with a degree in English Lit from Tel Aviv University and holds a master's degree in public relations from Syracuse University. She also founded the Latino Jewish Leadership Council, which I and HHF are very proud members. So Dina, let's start there. Please talk about why you started the council and the key areas of focus that align our communities. And also, on a personal side, what it's like for you to be both tremendously and fabulously Mexicana y Judía. I really do feel as though your own identity informs your work at AJC in this space.
Thank you, Tony, and hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today. I would like to thank mi hermano, Tony, and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for undertaking this project and getting us together to have this very relevant conversation, not only for Latinos and Jews, but for us as for every American and around the world. We are seeing around the world a spike in hate, and this should concern us a great deal. It concerns us a great deal at AJC and at the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. And indeed, we founded the Latino, the Belfer Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs back 15 years ago in 2005, because we understood that it was very important to bring both communities together. There's a lot of commonalities that I will talk about just in a little while, but there's a lot of commonalities in terms of our histories, in terms of geographies that we have shared, in terms of our agenda and values that we cherish, that we all cherish. So it just made tremendous sense to create this platform where we could undertake our work in a much more strategic and deliberate way. So the council, the Latino Jewish Leadership Council that Tony referenced, was founded in 2017 after very, very difficult presidential elections where we had heard hateful rhetoric against Mexicans, against Latinos. We thought it was very important, and also against Jews, by the way. We heard also anti-Semitism espoused during those elections. And we thought it was very important to create a forum where leaders of both communities around the country could come together and raise their voices as needed, because we knew that the years to come could be complicated in that respect. And they were. Tony referenced Charlottesville, but we also experienced Pittsburgh, and we experienced El Paso, and we experienced Puerto Rico, the abandonment of Puerto Rico. Those are issues that, you know, were of great concern to us as Americans and as members of minority communities. And we wanted to raise our voices and bring others on this fight for equity and for justice, and of course against racism. So that is, let's say, the origins of the council. We just met a couple of weeks ago to start strategizing during the Biden administration, and we identified the priorities for both our communities, which are three mostly. The first one, immigration reform. We continue to be very focused on the need for immigration reform. Unfortunately, it's been decades in the making, and we haven't seen really progress. We hope that during this administration, we'll see something real happening. It is urgent. It is very much needed. We see the type of pain that is happening on our border, but also we understand that in order to tackle this important issue, we have to focus on the root causes of immigration, which are in Central America and Mexico. We have to make sure that those countries provide jobs and for their citizens, that there's good governance, that there's no corruption, and that doesn't make uprooting really a matter of survival. So immigration reform is and will continue to be very important to the council and to both communities. The second issue that is of great importance to us is, of course, the uptick in hate crimes, hate rhetoric. We have been seeing that throughout the last years. We've seen an increase in white supremacist groups, which have been deemed domestic terrorist groups by the FBI. But we're seeing discrimination coming from different quarters. And it's not only Latinos and Jews. Asian Americans have been experiencing in the last year and years also discrimination and racism. We saw it recently in the very unfortunate attacks that they experienced in Atlanta and elsewhere. So we think it's very important that we come together and we identify how to fight together hate crimes. It's not only speaking up, but there's issues or there's initiatives that we can all undertake together to make sure that these hate crimes diminish and we can prevent them, and we can also punish them when they happen. You know, there has to be accountability. So we will talk more about it. The third area that is a priority for both communities is foreign policy. We know that in the Latino community, foreign policy has not been really a priority in institutional terms, although we see more and more Latinos involved in foreign policy. Latinos and Jews are both, or all of us, are diasporas. So we have connections with our homelands. We can be important bridges between our new homeland, our native homeland, our ancestral homeland. It's important that we play a constructive role. So foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East, in our case, as Jews, Israel, our ancestral homeland great importance. And as Latinos, everything that happens in the hemisphere is and should be of great importance. Strengthening relations between the US and the region, it's our neighborhood. So that those are the areas the three areas we're going to be focusing our interest, our attention, our efforts in the short term, and I suspect also in the long term. Now, about being a Latina, a Mexican American, a US Jew, you know, it's always enriching to try to navigate my different identities and to build bridges between all these identities. In Mexico, you know, I was also the other. The Mexican Jewish community is very small. We're only 40,000 Jews in a country of 120 million. We were, of course, part of Mexican society, but we were different. My father is also, my father was American. So even in Mexico, I was already a Mexican American. So I had another identity that I was navigating. Coming to the United States added another layer, being now a Latina. And for me, my job at AJC has allowed me, my job within the Latino and Latin American Institute within a Jewish organization has allowed me really to act as an interpreter, as a translator, as a cultural translator between both communities and find these commonalities and leverage the many opportunities to work together and to fight the good cause.
Thank you for that, Dina. I just want to thank you for that perspective that you bring. I don't think your work would be complete without that personal perspective that you bring into your job every single day. As we meet on Holocaust Remembrance Day, can you please share some of the background of this tragic chapter in our history and how this yearly anniversary commemorated around the world? And what are the messages being conveyed? And I have to mention on the historical, deeply emotional and spiritual journey you and AJC took me through at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. I remember a young lady giving us the tour who had done hundreds of tours, crying as she talked about her grandmother being killed as a little girl during the Holocaust, tears streaming down her face. And it really shook me. The generational suffering is so real from this horrific time in our history. So can you talk a little bit about that historical context?
Of course, Tony, and very memorable, you know, traveling with you to Israel on one of our Project Interchange delegations, and, you know, showing you different aspects of Israel and of the Jewish experience, including the Holocaust, which is a central aspect of the Jewish contemporary experience, even though it's the culmination of millennia of anti-Semitism. I have to say that I was born 12 years after the end of the Second World War. For me, you know, my grandparents in Mexico came from Poland in 1924, many years before the Holocaust happened. And they were embraced by Mexico, as many Jews were, as many refugees were, you know, they were able to experience freely their Jewish identity. On my father's side, my grandparents came from Lithuania, also to the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. So my grandparents themselves didn't, you know, thankfully were in freedom and in safety when the Holocaust happened. However, most of their family perished. My cousins, my aunts, you know, all of them perished, whether in Poland or Lithuania. And in fact, I am named after my grandfather's sister, Dina. So I carry within me and with me every single day that memory, the memory of the Holocaust. The memory from destruction also to redemption. You know, the incredible thing is that the Jewish people are still alive. And we're all over the world. Israel is a reality. It's the Jewish state. So in that sense, the Holocaust, of course, the memory of the Holocaust is always there with us. But it also it's a catalyst for us to find strength, to find hope, to understand that you cannot stay silent when there's injustice around you, when other people are persecuted. And just as it happened during the Holocaust, unfortunately, 6 million Jews perished because the world was silent. The doors were closed, and we learned the lessons. We learned the lessons, and we want to make sure that no other people around the world has to experience what happened. At the same time, anti-Semitism, which we thought had been overcome after such a horrendous experience that the world had finally learned, from centuries of hatred against Jews. Unfortunately, we see that anti-Semitism as a virus is still here with us. It adapts to modern circumstances, but it retains a lot of the same tropes, the same type of themes that has nourished it throughout so many centuries. So, hope, memory, tragedy, destruction, redemption, all this we can find, in the story of the Holocaust.
And it's important to know that history as we move forward in our future. When I think of that boat that was turned back at the beginning, just before America got involved in World War II, it brings to mind migrants being turned away from horrific crime and violence and oppression in Central America and other parts of Latin America. So I know that it's important that we take a look at our responsibility to not be silent, which is something I've heard you say over and over again. Can you actually take us on a brief tour of the history of anti-Semitism that allowed the Holocaust, and let's face it, hate crimes today to happen? I just want to say too, that it's important that we battle anti-Semitism in our own conversations when no Jews are around, at our own dinner tables, including in the Latino community. If you knew how many times I'm meeting with someone and it just kind of pops up where it's seemingly flippant and innocuous, it's not. Any kind of reference towards any group of people that is stereotyping, that is a dig, is intolerable. So it's important that we are all activists in our own homes. You don't need to be a woman to call someone out for being sexist. You don't need to be gay to call someone out for being homophobic, and you don't need to be Jewish to call someone out for being an anti-Semite. So can you, and always with the purpose of illuminating and educating, however, sometimes when it happens over and over again, you have to also let people know that I'm not going to stand for that kind of talk. So can you take us on that brief tour of how it allowed the Holocaust, and let's face it, hate crimes today to happen?
Of course. And Tony, I have to say, there's a saying, it starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. We can start with one group, as you well said, but we're all in this together. And it's the other that is always targeted. Anti-Semitism has been called the world's oldest hatred because it goes back millennia, as I said. I'm not going to go into details because there's so many chapters in this really torturous history of anti-Semitism, but let me just maybe underscore several important moments, let's say, in this history of anti-Semitism. The first one, of course, has to do with the whole issue of the establishment of Christianity as an institutionalized religion in Rome. And at that point, the argument the Jews killed Christ, what is called the deicide charge, was established. And because of that, Jews for centuries were put in ghettos. I'm talking about basically Europe. They were put in ghettos. They were rejected from different activities. They couldn't, for example, they couldn't own land. They had to dress in a different way, etc. And they were associated with the devil and with Satan. You know, and that was the beginning, let's say, of something that really unraveled, you know, and received other, let's say, other contributions from in the centuries ahead. But during the Middle Ages, particularly, Jews were accused of killing Christian children for the blood, which is called the blood libel, to bake the matzah, you know, the unleavened bread during Passover. They were accused of poisoning the wells. So they were, you know, they were killed because of that by, you know, by the thousands. That was the beginning, let's say. Of course, in the 20th century, 1965, the Catholic Church recognized that the deicide charge had to be abolished, and absolved Jews as a collective of the deicide charge, recognized that Jews are the elder brothers of Christians, and today the Catholic Church and Judaism and the Jewish people have very, very close relations. AJC played a very important role in bringing, you know, both religions so close together. This has happened as well with Protestant churches. So, you know, this has changed a great deal. But that was the beginning, I think, of something that, you know, unraveled throughout the centuries. As I said, Jews were expelled from different activities, but they were allowed to engage in financial activities. You know, they were the lenders. It was an activity that was prescribed by the Catholic Church. So the Jew, somebody had to be in charge of the finance. It was a Jew. So the whole stereotype of, you know, Jews and money comes from those first moments, you know, back in the, let's say, in the Middle Ages. Then, you know, as the years went by, or as the centuries went by, other things happened. For example, the whole idea of Jews as a conspiracy. You know, the cabal of Jews. You know, there's a global group, Jewish group, that wants to control the world. That goes back to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a book that was written by police in Tsarist Russia during the first moments of the communist revolution, and trying to find who was responsible for the social upheaval that Russia was undergoing. Jews were the scapegoat. Jews were the scapegoat at different moments throughout history. And then, you know, coming to the Nazi era, you know, which was something that we had never seen, because Jews in the past, let's say during the Inquisition, were able to convert and stop being Jewish, or, you know, they had other options to leave their Judaism behind. With the Nazis, basically, the Nazis said that Jews were born as a race, as an inferior race that had to be eliminated because it was contaminating humanity as a whole. And we've never seen, and we hope we will never see, the systematic scientific plan to eliminate every single Jew children, 1.5 million Jewish children died during the Holocaust. Jews that had converted or had stopped being Jewish 4 generations before, they were brought also to the gas chambers. And that was, let's say, the evolution up to the Holocaust. By the way, we all Jews feel that we're survivors because, if Hitler had succeeded, we would all have been dead by now. So, I've tried, it's a much more complicated story. There's a lot of chapters, there's a lot of complexity in this, but I wanted to give you just a taste because I know that these are some stereotypes and some themes that we hear over and over again, when anti-Semitic tropes are mentioned, and I wanted to make sure that our audience understands a little bit of where this comes from.
Yeah, and where it's going,
Yeah.
which is also disconcerting. And I have to tell you, HHF and I have been very active working on our borders with Mexico over the years. And we're actually going again at the end of this month in support of our unaccompanied minors and families and all immigrants that come here for refuge. And every time I go to the border, I am met with Jewish groups that are working on behalf of our migrants and alongside of other faith groups. I remember when I was taking the trip and taking a delegation a couple of years ago, when the separated family issue was raging, and you introduced us to our friends at the Islamic Society of North America and other groups that joined us for that trip. And I think Kim Kamen, who is on this Zoom, who also joined us. But those groups from the AJC, from HIAS, played a very significant role, along with a lot of lawyers that would go down there. I can't tell you how much we appreciate that support. But that support put a huge target on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Can you talk about that situation and the worrisome rise overall in anti-Semitism, but particularly in Europe, but not surprisingly in the United States as well? And I think it's also important to talk about that narrative that's being articulated by these hate groups and white supremacists, including how Jews are being scapegoated for supporting others that are being scapegoated, like immigrants and other marginalized groups.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, let me start with Charlottesville, because Charlottesville, I think, also had we saw that situation. As you might remember, the white supremacists, these neo-Nazi groups were shouting, Jews will not replace us. But it was not, this is based on what white supremacists call the replacement theory, which it doesn't mean that Jews are going to replace, the white population in the U.S., but it means that we are helping to bring brown people and that we're helping Black people, and we are empowering them to replace the white the white population. And we saw it again in Pittsburgh, because the criminal who killed 11 people at that horrendous attack, which had never happened before in the United States, also was motivated because HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, an organization that when it was created to help Jewish refugees that were seeking refuge because of anti-Semitism around the world. Today, they are helping others that are seeking refuge, and they're working with refuge populations on the border with Mexico. And they were, this terrorist or this criminal was very upset that HIAS had been helping refugees and bringing refugees, Central American refugees into the United States. So that was the motivation. So there you see how, hatred against Jews, but hatred also against Latinos came together. This is the type of narrative that we're seeing more and more with these white supremacist groups who were really in the gutter and came out in the last 4 years, became stronger, became legitimate. You know, their voices became legitimate. January the 6th, we saw the extent of what they can do. You might remember that one of them had a T-shirt that said Camp Auschwitz, and we saw other anti-Semitic memes. This is the type of narrative that we have been experiencing very intensely, let's say, in the United States. However, I have to say that anti-Semitism doesn't come only from the extreme right. It also comes from the extreme left, and it also comes from jihadist groups in Europe. In Europe, mostly, attacks against Jews have been by extremists, by Islamic extremists, terrorists who have gone into synagogues or Jewish schools or kosher march or whatever, and have caused the havoc that they have caused. So we say that with anti-Semitism, we have to really look everywhere because, it could come from the extreme right, it could come from the radical Islamist quarters, but it can also come, we can also see it in college campuses where Israel's right to exist is also called into question. The destruction of Israel is proposed. So, that is also something that we consider anti-Semitism. It doesn't mean that, you cannot criticize Israel, but when you call for the destruction of the state of Israel, we consider that anti-Semitic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really is coming from all sides, including from every religious group, has had those moments as well. So what can be done to prevent and combat these issues? And I know that you also go out of your way to build these coalitions, including a coalition with Islamic groups who have also been targeted by hate crimes and by different other religious groups as well. So what does that look like in terms of that convergence in terms of different groups that you need to build relationships with, the rhetoric that we need to stand up against? What can be done to prevent anti-Semitism from continuing along with other hate?
Of course. Look, AJC, one of our main missions is Intergroup Relations. AJC was founded in 1906, very concerned about the situation of Jews in Europe, but understanding from the very beginning that we could not do it on our own, that when one group was in danger, all minorities were in danger. So that has been AJC's mantra, let's say, from the very beginning. We believe that bringing different groups together to advocate for principles, for values, for common agendas is the only way that we can advance democratic values, that we can advance inclusivity, that we can inclusion, pluralism, etc. So that is how AJC works. And yes, we have created the MJAC, the Muslim Jewish Council, which we have many of them around the country. And it has been doing incredible work. We have been doing also work with the Asian American community. By the way, today, we're very glad to hear that after advocating together with our Asian American partners and with our Latino partners and others, the No Hate Act is finally, on a bipartisan basis, is being introduced both in the House and in the Senate. The idea is, in order to fight hate, we have to understand, the scope of the problem. We need to know how to define it, and we need to be able to target it in the right way. We need to undertake also educational programs in order to train police and others to deal with it. And this No Hate Act will do that. So legislation is a very important way of dealing with this. But there's other ways. The first one, I would say that our leadership counts. That when you see the President of the United States denouncing what's happening to Asian Americans, it sends a very clear message. It's not only the president. We need everybody who's in a leadership position to denounce anti-Semitism or any hate whenever and wherever they see it, and to say that there's zero tolerance for that in the United States. Social media is another important aspect that has to be taken into consideration. We have seen the amplification of hate through social media. It's not a coincidence that the uptick that we've seen in hate coincides with a time when social media plays such an important role in communication, in creating policy. It's the public square. It's a contemporary public square. So we need to make sure that social media is held accountable also for this, for promoting messages that can be quite hurtful and destructive. We were very happy that Facebook, for example, has been working now on the whole issue of Holocaust denial. As you know, that is something that has also been happening, that there's groups, especially on the extreme right, that deny that the Holocaust happened, that want to trivialize it and say that the Jews really, it's a creation by the Jews. We're very concerned about it because, of course, the memory of the Holocaust is something that can prevent it from happening. So holding our social media accountable and is very important, and we all have to raise our voices in that respect to make it happen. And coming together, not allowing, when we see anybody that is being attacked, all of us, every minority, every group in American society and around the world has to raise your voice. Silence, complicity. Silence is complicity.
And that's really important too, because when a mosque gets hit and is targeted, we need to raise our voices. When it's a synagogue, when it's a church, when it's immigrants, that's where you really form alliances, is in those times, instead of backing away from it. And everything has been politicized. That's the other problem too. Sometimes I think it goes so far over that they end up meeting at the other end, in terms of some of these issues that you see being used as political footballs. And I also am concerned when the other day I was wearing a shirt that said love on it. People were like, "You're so political. Are you?" And I was like, "It says love." And so the word love has now become politicized. And so that's the world we're living in now. So how do we maneuver around that?
It's a difficult question. I think again that we have to be very clear-eyed about moral clarity is very important. I understand that we live in a highly ambiguous, ambivalent world where people are in their own bubbles. As you say, there's a lot of polarization. But I think that moral clarity does exist, and we have to be very clear about the red lines. And when we hear attacks against the minority, when we hear racism, when we know, and when we know that's what it is. We have to be as clear and as strong as our voices and our influence allows us to be. But we cannot do it on our own. I want to repeat that again. I think we all have to come together in that, and it's not only like it's not a kumbaya type of message. It has to do with our survival, with everybody's survival, and again, it starts with somebody, it starts with the Jews, it doesn't end with the Jews. So we have to really speak up when we see this happening and try to kind of get over the like to say, the political or the, I think we were to sift through this noise, because it's noise when it comes to these things, and have moral clarity, and have the courage to speak up and say, enough. This is enough, and I'm with this group. We're together, and this has no place in this society.
And to be authentic in that support of right now the Asian community, in terms of the Black community. It's really important to be authentic in that space and not make it transactional, not make it trendy, that it is truly being part of a support
community
group.
Of conscience. We call it a community of conscience.
That's a very good way to put it, but it has to be authentic, because a lot of times, especially in this town, things are done as a strategy. That there shouldn't be a strategy to supporting the suffering of another group, and it's also important to listen. There was a monk that's still alive, actually, that was promoted by Martin Luther King as for the Nobel Prize at one point, named Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a monk from Vietnam, and he used to talk about compassionate listening. That simply by listening with great intent, you are somehow trying to relieve the suffering of the person speaking. And that's something that we need to do. Again, whether it's the Jewish community, certainly the Black community, the Asian community, the LGBTQ community, the disabled community, which are part of every single one of our different groups. And of course, women, and all through the Muslim community, we need to be able to come together in an authentic way. And I know what's in your heart and how you address these issues. So can you talk a little bit about Latinos and Jews? We're along with a lot of these other groups, we're tied by common histories and values and agendas. And it's really important that your institute is doing that work to build those bridges between those communities. And that includes with the other groups that you're working with. Like I said, that you work with Muslim groups, you work with different groups to ensure that we're there for one another when we're targeting an attack like we were just talking about. So what have been some of those areas where you have worked side by side, and how do we make sure that inclusion and diversity is all encompassing?
Of course. Tony, and I want to just reference in 2020, AJC conducted a survey of anti-Semitism in America. And one of the things that came out, which was very surprising, was the fact that almost half of Americans, 50% of respondents, had never heard of the word anti-Semitism. And also that they didn't, in contrast to how Jews we're experiencing anti-Semitism, non-Jews didn't feel that, the anti-Semitism was such a problem. I think it's very important. You talked about listening, but and also legitimizing, the group's feelings and sense, and sense of, I don't want to say persecuted, that's not the word, but if Jews feel that, anti-Semitism is there, or if Latinos feel that anti-Latino hatred has increased, or Asian Americans, which, as you and I were discussing for a long time, were not being taken seriously into consideration until these things have happened.
Yeah, that's nothing new.
Exactly.
Asians have been dealing with this since over 100 years.
Yeah, but if they were saying, hey, there's something wrong here, it's very important that those voices are validated. That's the word I want to say, that they are validated, and that we support them, that we show solidarity. Our institute, that we do, we work a lot within the United States. We also work in Latin America, as I said, because it's our neighborhood, because we believe that the Latino universe is very complex, and we have these connections to Latin America. So we try to find those intersections in order to leverage them and in order to find opportunities for collaboration. I think that the fact that as I mentioned at the beginning, Latinos and Jews are diasporas, meaning that, you know, we have different sense of belonging. We belong here, but we belong to Latin America, we belong to Europe, we belong to different geographies, moments in history, etc. That gives us an incredible opportunity to be bridges. You know, we continue to say, you know, the word bridge is quite important in terms of the work we do. But we're trying to find, you know, where can we learn from each other? Where can we support one another? Political empowerment. The Jewish community is a very small community. There's only 6 million Jews in the United States, but it's a community that punches above its weight in many respects. We want to work with our Latino partners and with others in order to share also our experience being a minority and you know, and being able to exert political influence in U.S. society and beyond. So you know, these are some of the issues beyond hate crimes and beyond everything else. There's very practical things that we can do together. We helped establish the Latino Jewish Congressional Caucus in 2011 because we felt that if Democrats and Republicans couldn't talk to one another, maybe as Jews and as Latinos they would. And we're relaunching it again. And the idea is also to have this connection between communities, try to advance legislation, which is important not only for our communities, for US as a whole, but that, you know, maybe in a smaller context will be more manageable. So these are some of the areas where we have worked together, and we hope to continue doing so.
Thank you, Dina. And as we close out, I want to take it back to the personal side of things. Can you talk about just in your own life, on a personal side, that integration of these cultures, of the Jewish culture, the Latino culture, the American culture, and how it kind of all comes together in you through your identity, but how you have to kind of be a little bit of everything in every different way, how you take in information. So can you just talk about that as we close this out?
Sure, of course, Tony, and
it's always so fascinating to me, and we have so many of these conversations.
But yeah, you know what? We're all a little bit of everything. I want to say, I think that this is our world. You know, we're all hybrid. We're all ethnically hybrid. You know, nationally hybrid. You know, it's our globalized world. It's the fact that most of us are immigrants. You know, we have lived in different environments, different countries. You know, and which really has enriched us and which has allowed us to have different perspectives that allow us to feel empathy and allow us to feel identified with different histories and different experiences, etc. And definitely, I mean, this has been my life's quest, you know, to find my identity. You know, and I'm glad that, you know, at the end of the day, I realized that I could be everything at the same time, a little bit of something more one day than another. You know, it's just an incredible experience. And I think that, you know, there's no downside to having these multiple identities and to having the opportunity to build bridges among them. On the contrary, I think that it allows us to strengthen the social fabric of the society, to make it more, more diverse, to make it more, as I said, more open to novel experiences. At the end of the day, we're a nation of immigrants, and immigrants continue to be the bloodstream of this society, and you know, and enriching our American experience. So I'm just glad, and I just feel privileged that I can be everything, both personally and professionally. I do it on a daily basis. and be part of wonderful conversations as this one, Tony, for which I'm very, very grateful.
And we'll have many more. So I appreciate you being here. I want to give a quick plug for tomorrow that we have another powerful conversation that's going to be very relevant to what we just talked about, called Making Spaces for Big Talk. It's called the American Dream and Promise Act of 2021. So it'll be tomorrow, Friday, April 9th from 4 to 5. And it'll be more in the other format where we actually hear from the community, and we'll have a group of folks that work on this issue or undocumented to talk about what they're up against. And it's really important that we continue to have these conversations. I want to thank you, Dina, for always opening the door to having these conversations and having an open mind when we have them. We had some very difficult conversations on that trip to Israel. And we also went into a lot of spaces that we didn't think we would go into. And everyone that you put in front of us, we had complete freedom to go into those territories and to go into those difficult conversations. And nobody backed away from it. In fact, it was encouraged, which is the way we should always be, willing to make space for those big conversations that we need to have in order to work more closely together and in order to move forward together. So thank you, Dina. Mi gran amiga, really appreciate you and all the work you're doing over at AJC and the entire team. Thank you, everyone that joined us, that zoomed in for this. Please continue to follow us in social media, because we're going to continue to have these conversations. Have a great one.